Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you and to see you this morning. There has been a lot for me kind of in the mix this week, a confirmation retreat and a funeral and a this and a that. But in the middle of all this, one of the things that kind of popped into my attention, and maybe you heard it as well, was the death of just one of the most wonderful poets that had been living prior to that, Mary Oliver. I hope you know of Mary Oliver. I quote her from time to time in sermons. She really was one of the greatest poetic gifts in this country that we've ever had. And often it's the case that, especially for Episcopal preachers, her spirituality that's found there was, I don't know, it just resonated, I think, with a lot of us. And so it was a hard day to hear that, though we've known that she had lymphoma and she was going to die at some point, and we knew that. She was not someone who was afraid of death. She wrote about it often in her poetry, and I remember her in an interview on NPR long ago. She didn't give a lot of interviews, but when she did, she would often read her own poetry, and she read this poem about what she expected or wanted her life to be like when death came, and that was the name of the poem, When Death Comes. There is a line there that stood out immediately as I heard the news, and I thought about, here's this person that's approaching this. I wonder what it was like for her. I remember the line that she said that basically at that moment she wants to be able to look at her life and know that she was a bride married to amazement. When the time comes, she wants to know that she was a bride married to amazement and a bridegroom who has received the world into her arms. It's a lovely, lovely line. It's the way that she lived her life. And all of her other poetry, you could see that as well. She could take the smallest, most insignificant seeming moment and pull out from that just the most breathtaking poetry. That line stood out to me as I wondered about her death, but then it also stood out to me because of the context of our reading today. Here we are, Jesus, the very first of his signs. Sometimes we call signs miracles. Signs a better word for it because signs point to something else, right? He's setting us up to know that this isn't just about wine and just about this wedding, but it's about something more, which is really important. It's the very first one of those, and it takes place at this wedding. There's a bride and a bridegroom. And just the way to tie that in with Mary Oliver seemed like, oh, maybe God was involved there somewhat. I love the notion of being a bride married to amazement. So I want to take the time to talk about this reading a little bit today because for me it seems like it draws this distinction between, and maybe that's what the entire Gospel of John does, those of us who are kind of married to amazement, and those of us who are maybe married to skepticism. Sometimes I feel like I'm married to skepticism, and from time to time I cheat on skepticism with amazement. It's not a great way of having a marriage, I'll tell you. But that's where I am from time to time with those two. We have a reading that starts off with maybe enough difficulty that we just have to work through that. Well, as I've been reading through this week with other people, there are so many things that might distract us. Jesus says, woman, what does that have to do with you and me? And some people immediately jump to, like, I know what it means when my kids say, take that tone with me, or my husband or whatever. I just start off by saying that is not at all what that means. Let's not be distracted by that. The term woman there is a term of affection. That Jesus would say that to his mother is not a bad thing. It's a term of affection. Lovely human being that you are, their business with their wine doesn't concern us, is the way that starts off. And it's hard to know exactly what happens next. Mary seems to assume that Jesus is going to do something because she turns to the servants and says to the servants, just do whatever he says to do. And you don't have any idea. We don't have any idea what happened in between those things, but eventually we get to the sign. Jesus eventually seems to say, it does have something to do with me. And I think that the key point there is that when Jesus says it has something to do with me, has something to do with the revealing of my glory, Jesus is trying to point to something else. That's why we call it a sign. Here's the trick. In shorthand form, who notices this incredible sign The chief steward doesn't notice. The people who are very involved in it don't notice. The chief celebrators at this wedding, who are married, yes, one to another, but maybe not to amazement, they don't seem to notice. All of a sudden, good wine appears. But to those servants who decided that they would get their hands involved, and maybe who had that spirit of amazement, they see something else entirely. Each one of these 6 stone jars hold 20 gallons of wine, or water, wine later. Sorry to jump the gun there on that one. 20 gallons, 128 ounces per gallon, right? How many ounces in your average wine bottle? 26, 27, 28, somewhere in there, right? Imagine how much wine is being made at this moment, right? They know that this is a sign of tremendous abundance and tremendous gift giving and grace. They know exactly what's going on, and it causes them to believe alongside the disciples who know exactly what's going on, and it causes them to believe. And it points to so much more, because that theme of abundant grace is going to come up time and time and time again in Jesus' ministry and in Jesus' life. And the final signal for all of it will come when Jesus, in his abundant mercy and love, goes to a cross and rises from a grave. That's the hour of Jesus' glory. When he says, "My hour has not yet come," that's what he's signaling. That's what he's pointing to. Here's the trick for me. This is, I'm keeping my list of, I think I've said that now 3 or 4 times. So I hope you're keeping a list of tricks. This is another trick. When Jesus approaches the cross, how many are there to look with a spirit of amazement and see what is truly happening? When Jesus comes into his glory, when Jesus displays his glory, when there is a display of tremendous, abundant love and grace, who notices? Not everyone. Not everyone. Those who are too busy with their sense of control in this world, those who are too busy with the worries and occupations of this life, those who seemingly can't allow grace to change them because it's too threatening, perhaps. All these different stories as they weave together, there's a whole host of people standing before the cross who can't see the glory. And there's a whole host of people who do. I know that there is no easy mechanism for just turning on belief or faith. This weekend I've been with about 25 of our young people on a confirmation retreat. If you've not been in the Episcopal Church or maybe a Lutheran church or something like that, you may not know what confirmation is. It's a moment in usually a young person's life, often an adult's life as well, where they decide, I'm going to claim this faith for my own and make it mine. It's not my parents' faith anymore, for instance. It's really mine. It's a really grace-filled and beautiful process to watch young people develop that sense of identity. And always what we say to our young people is this: if you are ready to do that, do that. And if you're not ready, but maybe your mom is saying you're ready, somewhere between honoring your father and your mother and being an authentic human being who can stand before a group of people and answer those questions for yourself is probably the right answer there, and I can't tell you which one to do. We usually end up with a group of kids that's very enthusiastic and ready. We end up with a group of kids that's kind of, I'm not so sure. We end up with at least a handful of kids who say, I really don't know. I really don't know. Throughout the process, we say to them, anytime you have any question at all, please feel free to ask. I had a young person come up to me yesterday. We were in a break. People were playing cards and basketball and all sorts of other stuff. And he, with the most, just calm delivery, said, I just don't know that I believe any of this stuff. I said, yeah, I totally get that. Like, one, I've been there, and two, sometimes I still am there. Like, there are moments where I look at these things and I think, golly, there's no turning wine into water into wine. That's incredible, and maybe quite literally. As we talked about that, and I started to share a little bit of what it has meant to me to be a bride or bridegroom married to amazement, and keeping my eyes open to see the abundant glory and grace of God, he stopped for a second and said, well, maybe the thing is that at 15, I just haven't had all the life experience that you've had, and so I haven't seen some of the things that you've seen. And so I stopped him and said, well, what have you seen? What have you seen? What has amazed you? What are the moments in your life? Whether you attribute them to God or to happenstance, what are the moments where your eyes were so open that you just didn't have words? Your eyes become so open that your mouth becomes closed. What are the moments in your life where you know that somehow this is beyond my understanding? Where are the moments in your life where you have been a bride or a bridegroom married to amazement? Marriage is a funny thing in that it's not a guarantee of ease, or even that the thing that we enter into in marriage will stay that way forever. Instead, it becomes a promise that I will choose to be wed to this thing, this person. That I will unite myself intentionally over and over and over again. I invited this young person to consider a life, a set of vows that would say, I will choose that in those moments of amazement, I will unite myself to them. And I will do it continually. And then I will perhaps know the abundant glory and grace of God. I want to invite you to that as well. Each of you. Each one of us maybe is someone who experiences amazement all the time, knows the abundant and beautiful glory of God so well, and some of us don't. Some of us know it sometimes, and the other half of the time, or maybe more than half if you're like me, it's easy to begin to dwell in our skepticism. But I know that when I see what I might see in my life, or when I come to the end of my life, like Mary Oliver, like the servants at this wedding in Cana of Galilee, like the followers of Jesus who follow all the way to the moment of his glory, I want to be a bridegroom or a bride married to amazement and ready to see all the gifts that God has given and welcome them into my heart. Amen.